Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Yes, big welcome in. Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Lukas Moore. And fairly big day, actually, in the world of baseball for the month of January, rolling into February. Obviously, spring trainings will commence before we even know it, and then you'll blink an eye, and all of a sudden, the baseball season will be in full swing. It happens very fast, just like spring coming usually happens fast. Hopefully, it'll happen fast here in the city of Chicago. I would hate for winter to extend itself with my first winter here. Usually, spring comes pretty quickly and suddenly throughout most of the country, and that's what I'm going to hope is happening here. But it is a big news day. Before we get to all those stories that I want to get into, I want to remind you to give us a follow. GSMC Baseball on Twitter. There's an underscore in between GSMC and baseball. Give us a follow there. And that helps us. Rate, subscribe, review, all those fun things. It helps the podcast. It helps me out. It makes everything better and easier. And we like to know when you enjoy the show. So please do all of that. Dusty Baker is the new manager of the Astros. We'll dive into that in just a second. Kris Bryant losing his grievance case with the Chicago Cubs. What does that mean? Why is that important? And then that conversation will lead us into Mookie Betts. And then from there, we'll talk about this new, essentially, luxury tax. That's what they call it in basketball. They have a different term for it in baseball, but it's all the same thing. Penalties for spending a lot of money on players. Is this working to replace what many have asked for such a long time in baseball, which is a salary cap? We'll discuss that. Plus, I want to make my argument for the designated hitter in the National League and collegiate baseball. I want to touch on as well, because we had confirmation that one of the people that tragically died on the helicopter with Kobe Bryant was a summer collegiate league baseball coach. And I want to kind of emphasize, I have a really unique perspective on it, how important summer collegiate baseball is, what it is, and why it matters to so many players that are currently in Major League Baseball, and why that loss does mean a lot to the baseball community. But that's all a little bit later in the show. Where I wanted to start is a place that I get to ring the bell and say, yes, I was right. The Astros were of the same mindset as me, and that is with Dusty Baker. Dusty Baker, former manager of the Nationals, where he won 95 and 97 games. Of the Giants, where he took them to the National League pennant. Of the Reds, where he led them to the playoffs for the first time since 1995 at the beginning of the 2010s. Former manager of the Cubs, where he was Steve Bartman, and then a bunch of mistakes made by the Chicago Cubs, away from taking the Cubs to their first World Series in a very long time at the beginning of this millennia. Dusty Baker, one of the most respected managers in the major leagues, has a bad reputation because he has never won a World Series. He has consistently failed in the postseason. But the Astros, following this major scandal, needed respect. They needed somebody who the entire locker room understood knows what they're doing, can listen to, can bring integrity back in the game, that the media can trust, that the organization can put him out there and be respectable. That's what Dusty Baker 100% brings in terms of what you need from a PR perspective from your manager following this type of situation for the Houston Astros. He brings that respect level. And the Astros mentioned that in their press release about the respect of the game, the respect of other teams that will bring the Astros by Dusty Baker being in the fold. He brings respect. I mean, other organizations, other clubs, other players, other managers will always respect Dusty Baker. That's one thing you've always heard about the guy, how much they respect him. And every organization that's fired Dusty Baker has mentioned how much they respect what Dusty Baker has done. And to me, it's because he's a great manager. It's hard to be that successful in so many places and not be a great manager. And I understand the World Series thing hasn't happened. And maybe it's because he can't get guys motivated for the playoffs. But to me, I tend to think it's more of the playoffs in baseball are near impossible. And Dusty Baker is a statistical anomaly to where it just hasn't happened for him. The whole thing's a crapshoot. Just because you have the best team does not mean you will win in the baseball playoffs. And he's just had bad luck. I think that is certainly possible for Dusty Baker. And it could happen at any time. I really have felt that with Dusty Baker, that he's had teams where it can happen at any time. Now, my opinion was different after when I was a big-time Cincinnati Reds fan. I still am a pretty big-time Cincinnati Reds fan. I'm pretty honest about my fandom on this show. It's not going to determine topics or anything like that. But I love the Cincinnati Reds. And Dusty Baker made me fall in love with the Cincinnati Reds. And I got angry. I got upset. I wanted Dusty Baker gone after their failure in 2013, after they got bounced from the wild card game, an embarrassing showing in Pittsburgh, after being swept by the Pirates to end the season, to end up in the wild card game. I said, this guy just can't win big games. And what do the Reds do over the next 5 seasons without Dusty Baker? Oh, it's the worst 5-year stretch in Cincinnati Reds history. And it took me about 2 years to be like, man, I regret the wanting Dusty Baker fired. And from that point on, I've thought he's a great manager. And it's a shame that the Nationals got over the hump without him. It's a real shame. It's a shame that there's so many teams that have won the World Series after he left. Now, maybe a few years. Cubs was about 14 years after he left. Giants was about 8 years after he left. Nationals a couple years after he left. Reds still haven't done it. We'll see. But Dusty Baker is a great manager, especially when there's a highly talented team, because he understands how to coach talented players, how to get the best out of talented players, how to mold a roster like clay and get them to play well throughout a regular season. And what the Astros can lean on here is, hey, our guys know how to win in the postseason. They don't need a manager to teach them how to win in the postseason. They just need a manager that's going to be listened to by the locker room, that can be molded and can listen to the front office, which Dusty Baker signing a 1-year contract will certainly listen to the Astros' analytical-based front office. He won't be rejecting of any of that. He's already coached in the Moneyball era twice with the Reds and then with the Nationals and had success twice in this era. So the analytics thing is not a worry for me at all. And maybe when they get to the postseason, the Astros made the argument to themselves, well, our players know how to win there. And we don't necessarily need Dusty to teach them how to win in the postseason. We just need to make sure this regular season goes right. And it's important for baseball that this regular season goes right. And I mentioned that on the show before. Dusty Baker ensures to me that the Astros are going to win 95 games, which ensures to me, because we know there won't be cheating this year. And you can say, well, how do you know? Well, it's going to be such a big microscope, and people will get banned from baseball if there's cheating again. The Astros will go down in absolute flames. It'll be the most embarrassing cheating scandal in sports history if they get caught again during this season. The whole league should be clean in terms of video replay just for this year until a new loophole is found. But when it's this much of a stink, this much of a PR hassle, when all the media and fans are going to be looking for it every game, you'd be silly to borderline stupid if you tried to cheat this year in terms of video replay and stealing signs. Everybody's going to be on their best behavior. We know that. And to me, the Astros winning 95 to 100 games would silence those who think that the cheating is the only reason they were one of the best teams in baseball. Now, some will say they have to win the World Series to prove otherwise, but to me, winning 95 to 100 games shows that they're a team that's good enough to win the World Series if things break right for them in the postseason. And I think Dusty Baker ensures that the Astros will be that this year, because how many times has Dusty Baker had a highly talented team and they win 95-plus games? It's happened a bunch. A bunch. and even led a Reds team that probably didn't deserve to win 97 games to a 97-win season. It's probably more of a 91-win team. So he's an elevator. He's a stabilizer. He's a respect bringer. He's one of my favorite managers in the history of baseball. And I hope, honestly, that he wins a World Series with the Houston Astros, if not this year, the next year, because no other manager deserves to win a World Series more that hasn't won one than Dusty Baker, because of what he's done for the game of baseball, how he's acted in each locker room and dugout he's been in, how gracious he's been every time he's been let go from these situations, how many players love him around the league. He's a beloved character, and it'd be awesome for him to bring respect back to the Astros, to prove that this entire cheating scandal wasn't as impactful in terms of wins and losses as everybody wants to say it is, to save a little bit of integrity in the game of baseball. That'd be awesome to see from Dusty Baker in 2020. I'm really excited, really happy that the Astros decided to go with this move. Buck Showalter, to me, would have been a stretch. He's not as guaranteed. He had some failures in Baltimore. He's had some failures throughout his career. To me, Dusty Baker was 100% the right and safe hire, and I'm glad that the Houston Astros made that decision. Kris Bryant lost the grievance case. That means he'll spend 2 more years in Chicago, or will he? We'll talk about the ramifications of the free agent trial from the star third baseman in Chicago. That comes up on the other side of the break. You're listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back in, GSMC Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Lukas Moore. Dusty Baker, new manager of the Astros. Good decision, Houston. I love the move. I'm excited to see what Dusty can do in Houston with a highly talented and, to me, still the favorite in the American League West, Houston Astros. Should be a fun season for them. Hopefully more fun than all this cheating stuff. I think it'll turn around. But boy, would it be rough if the Astros were not successful this year. Be a lot of bad headlines. Be rough to swallow for the people in Houston, honestly, for the baseball community. And for me, a person that said that this cheating scandal hasn't been so impactful, it's going to be hard for me to make that argument if the Astros completely fall on their face this year and fall well below their expectations of what their personnel should be. The Cubs last season fell well short of expectations for what this roster could be. It went from, in 2016, are we on the cusp of a dynasty in Chicago, the third largest city in the United States, one of the most popular teams in the world, have figured out their minor league system, have gotten star players, have used money on free agents, and they're ready for a big-time World Series stretch where not only will they break the curse, but they'll win 2 or 3. We went from that to the Cubs were just an 84-win team. They did not get better. In fact, they got worse over the offseason, and now they're considering trading their star third baseman, especially because they just won the grievance case and have 2 more years of team control of Kris Bryant. Shaky times on the north side of Chicago. So what does this mean? So what was this grievance about, first and foremost? Well, it's about Major League service time. So if you have 172 days of service time in one season, your clock begins in terms of you accumulating service time. So if you play 172 days of Major League Baseball, your service time clock will start, and you get 7 years from that point. But if you play 172, that year counts, so you only get 6 years from that point. So this was a big issue when it happened, because Kris Bryant, before he was called up to the major leagues, batted .425 after winning Minor League Player of the Year and being one of the most talked about prospects in baseball. Batted .425 leading into the 2015 season and was sent to spring training when he clearly should have been the starting third baseman for the Chicago Cubs. I mean, it was really clear. It was evident. It was so evident that the entire league could see it. But they sent him back to the minor leagues until he is 1 day past being able to accumulate 172 days. So that season, Kris Bryant accumulated 171 days of service time, meaning the Cubs got a whole extra year of control, which would be 2 years from now. So the grievance case, from Kris Bryant's perspective, is the Cubs did this on purpose. The Cubs understood what they were doing. He was only 1 day short. His performances since then have earned him the right to be a free agent after this season, which Kris Bryant is well in his rights to make this argument. And in my opinion, the Cubs were well in their rights to use this tactic. I don't know how that's going to help them if they want to ever keep Kris Bryant, because if I were Kris Bryant, I'd say, listen, you should have shown me loyalty and I show you loyalty in return. That's how this thing works. Every win was important in that 2015 season. Maybe we would have been a little bit better of a team and been a little bit frustrated with it. But the Cubs were well in their rights to do that, and that's why the Cubs won the case. It was 171 days. There's no loophole in the contract where, he was so close, because what is close? Can you do it 3 days short, 5 days short? It's got to be 172. It was agreed upon by the Players Union. It's written in the CBA. It is 100% the rule, and that's why the Cubs won the hearing, and Kris Bryant is going to have 2 years of control. So what's this mean for Chicago? Well, it means they could keep Kris Bryant for 2 years, which is good news if you want to keep Kris Bryant. It's also good news if the Cubs, who are currently sitting over that luxury tax or the CBI, there's a bunch of different names for it. I'm calling it the luxury tax because it's when you exceed a certain amount of money spent on players, you are then taxed on that salary and have to pay to Major League Baseball, meaning if you're taxed at 50%, which is after 2 years in this area, when you pay out a $15 million contract, it's actually a $22 million contract for the organization, 15 to the player, then half of that 15 to Major League Baseball itself. So it makes it really difficult to take really big rosters and really big payrolls. Now, the Dodgers will always be able to do it, and I'm sure they will try to do it for a long time unless they're bad. The Yankees will always try to do it, right? These large market teams will try to do it, and the Cubs, yes, they're a large market team in Chicago, but they're one of two teams in the city, and they've always operated more like a mid-market team than a big market team, and they're a fairly smart organization, I think, with smart people running it, and the ownership group just doesn't want to be in that tax threshold this year because they're not sure it's their year. So they're currently $2 million over, and trading Kris Bryant would definitely clear them of that. And it's just an interesting spot to be in with the Cubs because you look at the National League Central, it's a wide open division. Reds are the offseason winners, but how often do the offseason winners win the regular season? So you can't be 100% certain about the Reds. I feel like the Reds are an 85 to a 95 win team. I think they did get 10 wins better, and with a little bit of luck, they can be a 90-plus win team. But that's not certain. The Cardinals, you feel like the Cardinals are going to be 85 to 95 wins. They might be the best bet, the safest bet in the division to at least get to 85 and be competitive for playoff spots and wild cards. That's because it's the St. Louis Cardinals, and they usually have their stuff figured out. And they didn't really lose much from a team that did win the division in 91 games a year ago. So the Cardinals going to be there. Brewers, they took a step back, but they could be 80 to 90 wins. Pirates probably won't even reach 80. They might have just a $40 million payroll this year. So if you're the Cubs, you feel like the division is certainly there to be taken. There is not a dominant team. There's not a team that should run away with it. There's not a team where every projection model and analyst is saying they will win the division. So in terms of Kris Bryant, I say you keep him around at least to the trade deadline. And you can make other moves at the trade deadline to get under this salary thing. And if you're the Cubs and you believe in what your team is and what your minor league development is, and you plan on, because once you go under that threshold, under that tax, you're able then to spend as much money as you want the next year because it resets, that clock resets. So is this a reset year for the Cubs? That all remains to be seen. I hope they don't make a rash decision and decide to trade him before spring training. I think any trade for the Cubs should be made at the trade deadline. They should try to stay competitive. It's a wide open division. You could be 5 games in front in first place near the trade deadline, and then you go ahead and take a shot at it because you never really know if things work out. I think they put themselves in a position where they will easily be able to dump out of being in the tax or buy into being into it and trying to win the division, trying to make the playoffs, and trying to make some noise. And I think they should wait until the trade deadline. Show some patience is what I hope the Chicago Cubs do. But they have a lot more options in terms of an organization. They can fetch a lot more prospects for Kris Bryant, especially at the trade deadline, since he has that extra year of team control wherever he might get shipped. And you get to keep Kris Bryant for an extra year, worst comes to worst. So good news for the Cubs that they won that case. Bad news for Kris Bryant, who's going to have to wait an extra year to get his big payday. But it is what it is. Those are the rules. Collective bargaining agreement. You should probably get more mad at the union than at the team who utilize the rules to the best of their ability. They are running a business. Not how I would run my business. I would run my business understanding that I want this player to be loyal to me. I want this player to come back. But it's a tough call from both sides. But good news for the Cubs that they certainly won this case. Mookie Betts rumors are really heating up. Red Sox getting serious about the trade. Why I think it's going to happen before opening day on the other side of the break. You're listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
GSMC Baseball Podcast. I'm Lukas Moore. Give us a follow on Twitter at GSMC_baseball. Mookie Betts rumors really heating up. And they keep heating up. We've heard about it all offseason. The Red Sox still don't have a manager. They are $20 million over that tax threshold we keep mentioning. And we'll get into why I think that this has really done a good job to balance baseball a bit, and why I don't think it's far enough in terms of how to balance baseball. But that's on the other side of the next break. Right now, I want to talk about the Red Sox and Mookie Betts. When you keep hearing about it, you understand they're $20 million over having to pay an extra 50% in salary. It makes a lot of sense. You get rid of a big contract guy, you dump a few more guys, you don't even have a manager yet heading into spring training. You're mired in this just awful controversy. You have a really difficult division, so kind of an opposite situation of the Cubs. I like the Rays more than I like any team in the National League Central. The Yankees, they're in that division, and they are probably the front runners in the American League East. And if you're the Red Sox, this kind of feels like a lost season upcoming, and you want to be able to give yourself flexibility moving forward into the next year, so you want to get under that tax threshold so that it resets and you're able to go out and spend money a year from now. Unfortunately, that might require trading one of your really young, really effective stars, but you're going to get a haul of prospects. You're the Boston Red Sox, so it won't take long to really flip this thing around before you're able to spend money, maybe even utilize those prospects to go out and get somebody else that's younger or maybe on a better deal. This feels like a trade that's going to happen and happen before opening day. Don't know if it'll happen before spring training kicks off, but the Red Sox right now have no leadership in terms of a manager. It sounds like they'll wait until the investigation from Major League Baseball is done to hire a manager, which would make me a little more nervous even if I'm the Red Sox. You just can't be over that tax threshold this year, because this doesn't feel like a year the Red Sox are going to win the World Series. Usually you have somewhat of that feeling before the season begins, that maybe if everything goes right, you can win the World Series. And baseball, to me, when I judge teams in baseball, and this is one of those great sports where you can actually do this. You can do it in most other sports, but in football, it's kind of a laughable window because most football teams every year, I'm saying, they're going to be worst case 5-11, best case 11-5. And you're like, well, that's a massive window. I mean, how on earth can you give me that type of window? That feels like you're just predicting half the records possible. But that really is the window. And football is such a small sample size sport that you can have variances of that degree. Look at the Dallas Cowboys this year. By every metric, they probably should have been a 12-win team. Instead, they won 8. Variances happen. Things go wrong, right? Especially in a 16-game season. But the beautiful thing, and sometimes the annoying thing, about baseball is that it's 162 games, meaning that your range can be 20 games wide, but it really is effective. You understand your range, and we have projection systems that can really nail your range. And the Red Sox, your best case scenario is sneaking in as a wild card team. Maybe best case, and you're crossing your fingers here, and a lot of ifs have to happen, and you'll need some luck. You'll need the Yankees to fall off. Maybe you can win your division. But that, I wouldn't even put that in my floor-to-ceiling projection for the Red Sox. And when that's not in your ceiling projection, you want to get under that tax threshold because in case, you want to be competitive next year, you don't want to pay 50% of salaries a year from now just because you took a swing at it when you really didn't have a chance the year before. And so that's why I think this deal is going to happen for the Red Sox. They're in retreat mode as an organization. They're not on the front foot. They need to regroup, refigure themselves out, reconfigure the front office, how they operate things, find a manager that they believe in that can lead them moving forward, change everything. That's what has to happen with the Boston Red Sox moving forward. And that's why I think Mookie Betts is headed out the door, just so they can recalibrate, reset that tax penalty, and move on. Move on from this entire thing. Unfortunately, Mookie Betts will be the victim of that, especially if he goes to the Padres, because I think the Padres would just be taking a swing and giving up prospects to not be competitive again. It feels like that's what the Padres have done and will always do. But Mookie Betts would certainly put their ceiling projection around 95 wins, which for the Padres is exciting. But they'll always seem, even when they have great teams, to never really end up past 85 wins. That's the curse of the Padres, unfortunately. But Mookie Betts, I think, would be a good addition there. I think there's a lot of teams that want him. But again, this feeling is circulating around Major League Baseball that the Red Sox are almost desperate to get rid of Mookie Betts. And you hear rumor after rumor after rumor, and they're really pushing it. And what a team does in terms of communicating, if I'm the Red Sox, I want to leak out how available Mookie Betts is to put pressure on organizations like the Dodgers, teams that have money, teams that have chips to trade, that could want to add Mookie Betts, put pressure on them because their fans know he's available. Their fans know you have the pieces to go and get him. So why aren't you getting him? But if I'm the other organizations, I see them trying to push you into trading for Mookie Betts as a reason for me to be patient and that you might give me him for less anyway. And it's basically a waiting game. So the Padres are waiting for the Dodgers, waiting for some American League team. Everybody's waiting to see who's going to make what the Red Sox want, who's going to make that offer. And I would also wait for the Red Sox to come down on their offer. So this is a thing that could go back and forth, but he's such a talented player. I think it gets done before opening day. I think one of the teams that's interested is going to crack, is going to give the Red Sox what they're after. But the Red Sox want to deal a kid. And when a guy like that, of that talent level, wants to be traded, not in terms of the organization wants to trade him, not he wants to be traded per se, but when an organization is looking to trade a guy like that gets traded. That's what usually happens, especially under this new tax thing. And this is one of the ways that the tax threshold is working in baseball. And I'll discuss that more on the other side of the break. Is it good enough, though, to replace a classic salary cap? Is baseball balanced enough? We'll discuss on the other side of the break. You're listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Balance in baseball. It's something it's been looking for a very long time, especially in the modern era when salaries are starting to get really out of control. Small market teams continuously fell behind in baseball. And over the last couple of years, they've added this tax threshold thing. And that's what I want to dive into right now on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Lukas Moore. Give us a follow on Twitter at GSMC_baseball. And we see this in sports around the United States. The salary cap. Major League Baseball does not have one of those. The NFL does, the NBA does, but Major League Baseball does not. I believe the NHL also has a salary cap. Major League Soccer even has this thing called a designated player. You're only allowed 3 of them, and those 3 players you can pay whatever salary you want, but the rest have to fall under the salary cap. So that's if you want to go and get a international superstar and bring him into the fold. You're only allowed 3 of those players, and there's a cap in terms of what you can pay those players in totality. And then there's another cap for your regular roster. So each league, other than Major League Baseball, has a way to make sure that teams are on fairly even playing fields in terms of spending money. And we see in other sports that this can lead to small market teams finding ways to be competitive, finding ways to have the best players, pay them the highest salaries, and be competitive for long stretches. And baseball has struggled with that a little bit more. Now, it's very interesting the way baseball works, and some don't want the salary cap because if you're a guy that loves numbers, if you're a guy that loves analytics, if you're a guy that loves diving into and understanding how to run businesses, it's very much like the business world. And these small market teams figuring out ways to compete with big market teams is very interesting. It's an interesting topic. And that's why there's an entire movie starring Brad Pitt made about it. It's interesting. How does a small business that has a very low operating budget, that can't pay their employees as much, how do they compete with the biggest business that can pay their employees the most, that has more resources, more opportunity to spend those resources? It's a really interesting topic. It's an interesting discussion point. And in baseball, the Yankees will always be great because the Yankees will always have money. Now, they might have a bad 2 years, bad 3 years, but the Yankees will be competing for World Series and winning 100 games time and time again. That's why they have 27 World Series. It is what it is in baseball. And I get that this decade the Yankees didn't win the World Series for the first time ever, I believe. They won a World Series in every decade. But they got awfully close, right? They were awfully close. And it just isn't like that for teams in Major League Baseball. What I do have to say about this new tax thing, though, is it's working okay. It's forcing a team like the Red Sox to deal Mookie Betts. It might force the Cubs to deal pieces at the deadline. Because even though that they're big market teams, Boston, Red Sox, one of the biggest brands in baseball, Chicago, the Cubs, one of the biggest brands of baseball in the 3rd largest city in the United States. Although they're big market teams and big brands, they'll be forced to make decisions to save themselves money moving forward. So that's positive, right? But it is not nearly as effective as a salary cap. And although these changes were made because small market owners, like ownership at the Reds, ownership at the Royals, ownership at these teams that just simply can't spend with them, they've been wanting a salary cap for a very long time. Although this helps, it doesn't close the gap completely. And I personally am in favor of a salary cap in baseball. And I get it's going against tradition. I get it's probably something that the players' union would never agree to, because salary cap restricts salaries and all that good stuff. But to me, it makes the most competitive type of sport, most competitive type of game. And in baseball specifically, because baseball is prone to parity, yet we see none of it. So football is a sport that's prone to parity because of its small sample size, right? It is a sport that's prone to parity because there's only 16 games. You have 3 bad halves, and all of a sudden you're 8-8 instead of 11-5. You went from the 2 seed and having a bye to out of the playoffs. That's why football has parity. Not because it's a sport that lends itself to parity. But baseball is a sport that has parity because it is a sport that lends itself to parity. Hitting is really hard year to year. Pitching is really hard year to year. There are rhythms and streaks. And the thing that kind of keeps baseball consistent to a point is the long seasons. But there are big gaps in talent in terms of how much money you can spend on this talent. And if those gaps shortened, we would see baseball as probably the most parity-filled sport, I think, out of the 4. Other than football, football will always be more parity just because of the small sample size. But baseball, to me, if you can get the talent gap at the same level that it is in the NFL, because here's the secret about the NFL. The 2-14 Cincinnati Bengals, who will have the number 1 pick, are about, take your hand, take your finger, and put them about an inch apart, are about that much talent, just a little inch of talent away from a team that's about to win the Super Bowl. And you can scream and shout all you want that that's not true, but go look at the Bengals schedule. They had a 1-point loss to the Seattle Seahawks, a Seattle Seahawks team who beat the San Francisco 49ers. You run that through any computer projection model, and it'll tell you the Cincinnati Bengals, the worst team in the NFL this season, were not that far away in terms of talent from the best team in the NFL this year, the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the Chiefs have the best quarterback. They might win the Super Bowl. That's for another podcast on a completely another show. But the Niners, in terms of overall quality, you can say they're the best team or one of the best, and the worst team in the league, I promise you, was not that far away. That's why you see last to first every single year. Now imagine if that talent gap were tightened to that level in Major League Baseball. I think it'd be a much more competitive year-to-year product. Every team would feel like they have a real opportunity because it's a sport that lends itself to parity, even over 160. The reason we have 162 game seasons in baseball is because this sport lends itself to parity so much. That's why the postseason's a complete crapshoot, because it is such a parity-driven sport. So if you shorten the talent gap, it can be just as parity-filled as the National Football League, which is something that drives its popularity because every fan base goes into the offseason thinking that this is the year. This is the time that they have a chance to turn things around. And every NFL fan base, no matter how many times they failed, always believes in the next season, always believes in the next year. Very few times do NFL franchises go into an offseason without a modicum of hope. There's always a little bit of hope moving forward. And Major League Baseball, it simply doesn't exist because sometimes the talent gaps are just too large. But if the talent gaps were tightened, a parity-filled sport then will allow itself to have more parity. And that means you're going to have last to first all the time. You'll have teams go from 75 to 95 to 81. And that might be annoying for front offices. It might become harder to run a baseball team to operate under a salary cap. But it's going to make a better product. More markets will have teams in the playoffs. More will be competitive. It will be more exciting. We'll have more World Series champions. And that just expands the popularity of the game. So this tax thing is cool. It's helping a little bit, but it's not nearly far enough. And I think that about over half of the major league owners agree with me. And I've actually talked to a few that agree with me. And honestly, you can ask any of them private. They won't put it on record, but they are upset. And I could understand why if you're a small market owner. they are upset that there is no salary cap in baseball. And they want it to be more fair, and they want it to be more competitive and more parity-based. I think it's good for the health of the game. I think it's good for the health of the small markets. I think the larger markets will still thrive and still probably be the better teams more times than not. We see that in the NFL, just because they'll have more resources in terms of scouting. They'll have more fans. There'll be more energy around everything. They'll have more raw money for facilities, and they'll gain advantages in those areas. But in terms of ability to spend money on players, I think that should be even across a league, especially when every franchise is valued over $1 billion. I think it's only fair to put it on a level playing field. That's just my opinion on it. On the other side of the break, I'll give you my opinion on another controversial topic. Can the NL put in a DH already? 2021, potentially. I read a story the other day. I think that would be a lot of fun if they can put in a DH. I would really appreciate that from Major League Baseball. We'll talk about that on the other side of the break. You're listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
GSMC Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Lukas Moore. Big welcome back into the show. Got about two more topics for you as we close out the midweek edition. Designated hitter, right? It's something that we're all familiar with. If you played at any level of baseball, unless you played in the National League, then you might not be familiar with it. But if you played in the National League, you probably played in AAA, AA, Single A, High A, Rookie Ball, Low A, Fall Ball, college baseball, high school baseball, middle school baseball, every level of baseball where you use the designated hitter. And before we dive into this argument, give us a follow on Twitter at GSMC_baseball. But yeah, you'd be familiar with the designated hitter. Why? Because it is in every league in the world other than the National League, which is technically just a conference of Major League Baseball. It's like if the NFC had a different rule than the AFC, right? Especially because interleague play is not just cornered in 1 month anymore. You play the American League throughout the year now. And Major League Baseball has been slowly, as it often does, slowly trotting towards this change. Oh, it's tradition, the pitcher's hitting. And to me, it just doesn't make any sense. I like when things make sense, right? When sports across the board tend to be consistent on a few things. So what I don't like about the college football playoff is the fact that it is the only sports league in the world where you can win every game you play and not be named the champion. That's certainly possible, and we see it all the time in the college football playoff. NFL, win every game, champion. Major Leagues Baseball, win every game, champion. NCAA basketball, win every game, you're the champion. No matter what level, no matter how many people go to your games, no matter how old your uniforms are, it doesn't matter. No matter what conference you play in, NCAA basketball, champion. And you just go through sports leagues, high school football, win every game, champion. All right, even if there's 700 teams in a state, win every game, you're the champion. Except in college football. So I don't like that inconsistency. And in baseball, every league I've coached in, which is like 5, every league I've played in, which is probably like 10, going back to when I was 8 years old, every league that I've broadcasted for, which is 4, has the designated hitter. The American League has a designated hitter. AAA has a designated hitter. AA, Single A, both high and low, rookie ball, the designated hitter exists. So that inconsistency then shows its face in the National League, where we have to watch pitchers go up and bat 180 for most of the year, ruin rallies, harm comeback opportunities, and put managers in a difficult position to execute double switches. And to me, you can talk about that, oh, well, it promotes gamesmanship and it makes it feel more like chess and strategy. It's just not as fun. Because, listen, you're trying to make a fun product, too. And how many people out of 40,000, so if you have 40,000 people at a baseball game, how many are thinking about the upcoming double switch decision for the manager in the sixth inning? I mean, probably 10,000 if you're lucky. Because really, I barely think about the double switch decision. And I'm a guy that's coached the game, that's broadcasted the game, that's learned the game from players who have been in the minor leagues. And I don't think about that decision. I like to think myself as a thinking baseball guy. And it's something that if I'm not in charge of the decision, I'm not even interested enough to think about the upcoming decision. Now in football, I'm interested in the chess of should you pass, should you run a screen, 2nd and 1, let's go deep. That's pretty easy to understand. And as a guy that likes to think about the sport, I get excited about thinking about that. But in terms of double switches, I don't get excited thinking about a double switch. I don't get excited about the pitcher batting 8th today because it might help us a little later in the game, make a substitution. These are rather boring decisions. And you're really kind of making a bad decision either way. It's not a part of the chess of baseball. And the chess of baseball right now is played outside of the lines. It's a fairly straightforward game to where you've made all your decisions about how your lineup's going to go, how you're going to react to certain situations. The front offices are writing lineups a lot of the times now. We need to focus on playing the game, making the product of play the most entertaining product possible. And that is with designated hitters. Because you put an extra hitter in the lineup. A guy that's going to hit an extra 20 to 30 home runs a year most of the time. Add another 60 to 80 RBIs. Give another jersey to sell. Give another name to remember. Give another star to a city to embrace. Give chances to guys who don't necessarily have good fielding traits but can really hit the baseball. Let guys extend their career. You look at the Cincinnati Reds lineup. Boy, they got a lot of outfielders. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just put one in the designated hitter slot every day instead of having to watch Luis Castillo swing a bat? Yeah, that'd be nice. And then you have the option, well, what about the dual threat players? What about Michael Lorenzen? What about Shohei Ohtani? What about these guys who can hit and pitch? Well, you keep the rule that's in the American League that you can surrender the designated hitter spot if you so choose. And if you decide to do that, to let your pitcher who's also a stud hitter hit, great. They are an excellent player and you're making a decision for them. But the fact that you're not allowed to have a designated hitter in the lineup when the National League is the only league right now that I can think of that does not do a designated hitter, it just doesn't make sense. It's not consistent. I like consistency. I like a more entertaining product, and I hope that the National League moves to this sooner rather than later. 2021, rumors are it might actually finally happen. I think it should have happened this year. They should have brought it right in with the 3-batter rule. Big change in baseball. Designated hitters there. Half the fans that went to your games wouldn't even have noticed. I promise. Half the people that will go to Wrigley Field in 2 weeks, well, in like 6 weeks, but 2 weeks into the season, half the people that go to Wrigley Field will be like, oh, there's a designated hitter. I didn't even know that was because people, like, when they watch baseball, it's a casual watching sport half the time anyway. So it's a change that honestly would not insult anybody, in my opinion. And those that are insulted by it, they care so much about baseball, they're going to watch anyway. You won't lose any fans by making this move. You just make it a little more entertaining. And you'll add stars. You'll add hitting power. You'll add runs. You'll add excitement. You'll add more 7th and 8th inning comebacks. And that is good for the health of baseball. Another thing that's really good for the health of baseball, summer collegiate baseball. We had some tragic news. A Cape Cod manager was on board the plane with Kris Bryant. And that really made me think about summer collegiate baseball, and I've had a lot of experiences in it, and I want to tell you why it's so important for those of you that might not know what it is. And we'll do that on the other side of the break. You're listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
GSMC Baseball Podcast. Lukas Moore here. Final section of the show. It's been a fun one, midweek edition of the episode. Baseball is kind of slow this time of year because it's really hard to play baseball, especially in the northern parts of the country. High school seasons, though, are about to get underway in terms of the southern part of the country. So if you're one of the warmer areas of this United States, well, I'm excited for you. You're about to get started. You're about to get rolling as we move into the month of February. A lot of college baseball teams will kick off in the middle of February. They'll make their southern trips, the ones up north, and the SEC and those conferences, well, they'll be in full swing because they'll be enjoying 45, 50-degree weather, and that's certainly good enough to start up playing baseball, maybe even 65, 70 if you get deeper in the south. It's really one of those things that makes baseball interesting in terms of a collegiate product or a high school product is you have so much different start times throughout the country because weather is so important. You cannot play baseball in states like Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Maine, New York. You can't play baseball in February. You can't really even play it in March. And in leagues and high schools, organizations that try to start in March, it's difficult. You're going to have a lot of rainouts, a lot of snowouts. Your schedule will be very backloaded where you'll play on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for a whole week, which is pretty intensive for a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid. But it is what it is in the North. And that's why the South has a bit of an advantage because they can play all year long, and those kids are coming off winter baseball and then rolling into high school baseball, and they have less cancellations. It's one of those really interesting things about the sport of baseball. Another one of those really interesting things about the sport of baseball is summer collegiate baseball. So for those of you that don't know, here's how baseball is organized. You have Major League Baseball, which is obviously the highest professional ranks. And now you have all these levels of professional baseball that have developed over the years that are actually being shortened, it appears. We'll see how that plays out in terms of court and the shortening of minor league baseball in terms of less teams, less locations, less leagues. But it goes Major League Baseball, AAA, AA, High A, Low A, Rookie Ball. Then there's some fall leagues and organizations that don't have everybody in Major League Baseball, but everybody pretty much has one just in different leagues. Then you go to Independent League Baseball, which this is the Frontier League. This is the Pacific Coast League out on the West Coast that has 4 teams. These are professional baseball teams that don't pay a lot to their players. Their players kind of use it as a part-time job. They're independent teams that'll have 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10,000 people at their ballparks per game. Still minor league baseball, but not affiliated. They are not connected to any major league organization. Then below that, you have college baseball, and there are other organizations who make money whose only operation is baseball, which is not colleges. So the University of Georgia is not just a baseball operation. It is an athletics program. But these are called summer collegiate baseball leagues. And they are all over the country. You probably have one pretty close to where you live. So there's the Great Lakes League, which is in the Great Lakes area. You have the Northwoods League, which is across the Midwest and into Michigan. You have the Cape Cod League, which is out on the Cape in the Northeast, which is played 42 games in the summer. That's where some of the best players in the country go. You have a Texas League. You have a West Coast League. You have a Prospect League, which is also in the middle of the country. And all these consist of summer collegiate baseball. And players who play baseball for big colleges will go in the summer to play with other kids from colleges all across the United States and compete for championships, get innings if you're a pitcher, get at bats if you're a batter, formulate relationships with players who will eventually try to make their way into professional baseball, and grow the game in terms of popularity, in terms of attendance, in terms of all those things. Now, I've had the opportunity to work for 3 separate leagues and 3 separate teams in those leagues as broadcaster in summer collegiate baseball. And we had sad news. A Cape Cod League manager was on board the helicopter that went down with Kris Bryant and his daughter, and 9 people perished there. And it's a rough story, but it reminded me of the importance of summer league baseball. And I want you to know that just about everybody in Major League Baseball had some sort of experience with these summer collegiate leagues. The Northwoods League's Major League alumni list is long. It is thick, and it's got a lot of all-stars. Same with the Cape Cod League, and then less so once you get into the lower leagues, but they still certainly have professional baseball players come out of those leagues. They have big, giant all-star festivities to where players can show off their abilities to scouts and front offices. And the most important thing is it connects these baseball players to other baseball players, and then they tend to meet up later on in professional baseball. They stay connected, and they make friends. And it's one of those beautiful things that not a lot of people are aware that it goes on, but it's something that's really valuable for baseball. Building those relationships, building that camaraderie. And that's one of those things baseball allows you to do that football simply does not. You cannot go play football in the summers for fun, then go back and be productive in the SEC. Football's too hard. Basketball, even, once you get into the college level, it's hard to have those summer type of leagues. But in baseball, you can keep playing as the days of summer wear on. And those guys, they get together, they like to party, and they have a lot of fun, and they try to win a championship. And people from Penn State and Indiana become friends, and people from Notre Dame and their rivals throughout the country become friends. Tennessee and Chipola. And these guys will follow each other throughout the draft and congratulate each other. And I think it's one of the coolest things about baseball is those summer collegiate leagues. And I'm really happy I've had the experiences that I did have in those summer collegiate leagues, because it really shows you how connected these guys can be in terms of draft picks, in terms of rooting for each other, in terms of giving advice. Right? And so here's an example. Right? Joe Boyle's a guy who's at Notre Dame right now that throws north of 100 miles per hour. Watch him, follow him. I saw him mature both as a pitcher and as a person by his ability to communicate now with his teammates from Notre Dame who are on this team. So obviously the Notre Dame guys will gravitate towards each other, and they look like brothers to me. And I ask him, all these Notre Dame guys, a lot of talented players, hey, you guys seem like you're best friends. Were you best friends at school? And they were like, no, we actually really barely talk to each other. It's a big program. I stayed more with the pitchers. He stayed more with the hitters. And it helped him feel more a part of both the Notre Dame program and the baseball community. What does he go on to do the next season after this experience in summer collegiate baseball? Works on a slider, gets even better, feels more comfortable, and dominates the Cape Cod League when he gets the opportunity to go back. Same with Nico Cavadas, a guy that went to Notre Dame. And I can list a bunch of players who elevated their experiences in these summer collegiate leagues, who built that camaraderie, who built that importance of understanding you're a part of a community in baseball and that guys believe in you and you are highly talented and you can perform at a high level. And that's why that's super valuable. And I just wanted to go over this interesting part of baseball, this really important part of baseball that not a lot of people know about, summer collegiate leagues. Look one up that's near you. They're fun games to go to, and you'll find a really talented player more times than not at those games. First round, third round, fourth round draft picks, just playing the kids' game in the summer. And it's awesome because any kids that go to these games, they can get close to the players, autographs, super easy. It's a lot of fun. This show's been a lot of fun, but we are coming to an end. And I just want to thank you so much for listening to today's show. Please follow us on Twitter at GSMC_baseball. and give us a rate, a review, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcasting service. We'll talk to you on Friday. This has been the GSMC Baseball Podcast presented by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lukas Moore, and I'll see you next time. This has been the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.